Ever since I started watching anime back in the late 1990s, I've been obsessed with one character archetype, the Ojo-sama. For those unfamiliar, Ojo-sama is a Japanese honorific that refers to a high-class young woman, and the place you most often hear that honorific is from the mouth of a maid or a butler. Hayate the Combat Butler is a great example. I think Hayate says Ojo-sama more than he says the female lead's name. Throughout anime history, Ojo-samas have either been cast as side characters or as villains, and it makes sense. Protagonists are the underdogs, right? How can you be an underdog when you have enough money to buy a mansion in Tokyo? This is also why we often see Ojo-sama characters get humiliated for comic relief. It's supposed to be cathartic to see someone who's supposed to be better than you slip on a banana peel, right? Right? But this raises some interesting questions. Why are these characters usually female? What has changed about Ojo-samas in the past few years? And what does the world look like from their perspective? Good evening, friends, and welcome to Winterblade AMVs. And this is not an AMV. Tonight, we'll be reclaiming the Ojo-sama. Now, I'm going to confess something at the start of this video. I haven't played very many otome games or visual novels geared toward young women, but if you follow the tropes, then here's the story that you've probably heard. Shoujo romances were, once upon a time, absolutely saturated with earnest, hard-working heroines and catty, entitled villainesses, with corkscrew curls and a laugh that goes, oh ho 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 ho, like Dr. Robotnik from that Japanese Sonic CD game. The shoujo heroine is a reflection of the player or reader, with all those salt-of-the-earth qualities that a young woman is supposed to value in herself. She's humble, quiet, generous, and lovable. Then meanwhile, the villainesses are like Cinderella's evil stepsisters. Just as the protagonist is there to make the player feel good about who she is, the villainess is the perfect reflection of who she isn't, a warning about who she should not be. The villainess is loud, she's demanding, she's unashamed. You wouldn't want to be like her, right? She's mean and rude. We're coming back to all of this later. But something really interesting happened in the past decade. My Motto is Living Honestly and Humbly was a Japanese web novel released in 2013. And while it didn't exactly make waves around the world when it released, it laid the foundation for what would become the reincarnated as a villainess, or villainous isekai, subgenre. This subgenre is characterized by the following premise. A character consumes a piece of media with an Ojo-sama as an antagonist. In the story she read, that Ojo-sama dies. Then, our protagonist wakes up in the world of the story, in the body of that villainess, and has to survive. While the protagonist of my motto is Living Honestly and Humbly, which I'll be shortening to Honestly and Humbly from here on out, is reincarnated into a manga here and not a visual novel, she receives a lot of the same benefits and has to evade a lot of the same hazards that later villainous protagonists would. Sudden onset of memories from her past life? Check. Constant fear of death and or ruination? Check. The villainess tries to avoid the male love interests to avoid bad endings, but they just become more interested in her. Check and check. What's interesting is that this web novel seems to be incredibly aware of what makes being a so-called villainess so dangerous. Since Reika, the protagonist of this web novel, realizes that her source material counterpart gets in trouble for being scheming and prideful, she goes out of her way to live, well, honestly and humbly. It's right there in the title. Interestingly, this light novel doesn't seem to criticize the original narrative of the manga that the protagonist was reincarnated into, which treats financial ruination as the natural outcome of Reika's romantic rivalry. So unfortunately, that's about as deep as I can go with this one, because unfortunately it is not available in English. So I can't read it. Does it sound like Reika might be being punished just for the crime of being in love? Yes, it does sound a little like that. But can I prove that? Can I prove that she doesn't deserve it on some level? That she doesn't have a kick the puppy moment? No. While most of us in the West were deprived of the web novel Honestly and Humbly, another similar story would quickly expose the world to the villainous isekai trope. You may have already guessed that this anime was my next life as a villainess. All routes lead to doom. I'll be abbreviating this title to Hamefura for the rest of the video. Hamefura first released as a light novel in 2015, with an anime adaptation airing internationally in 2020. And it was this 2020 anime that really kicked off the villainous isekai genre's popularity, at least here in the West. The reasons aren't surprising. Anime News Network describes Hamefura's protagonist as charismatic and instantly lovable, describing the show as a bisexual power fantasy. But what has Hamefura done to earn this praise, and how does it fit into the bigger picture of villainous isekai stories? What makes Hamefura work for so many fans is simply who the protagonist is as a person. The original version of Katarina Kleis is the Crown Prince's mean-spirited fiancée, who leads her fellow female students in bullying Maria Campbell, the game's protagonist. So visual novels, if you're not familiar, are basically choose-your-own-adventure books, but in video game form. As the player makes choices, the story takes different paths and reaches different endings. Katarina, the real-world person who woke up one day as a video game Ojo-sama, was horrified to realize that she had been reincarnated as the game's villainess because, well, in all of those endings, she either dies or gets exiled. So Katarina freaks out, as one does, and starts trying to change the world around her so she doesn't get killed off or banished. She learns to farm in case she does get exiled. She forms a genuine emotional connection with her younger brother. She settles the feud between two rival princes. Instead of emotionally blackmailing her fiancé, the Crown Prince, for leaving a scar on her forehead, she instead reminds him frequently that it's totally okay to break off the engagement for any reason, and he doesn't even consider it for some reason. You might be catching on to a pattern here. Like other isekai subgenres, being loved by everyone you meet is often pretty central to villainous isekai, even though the protagonists are supposed to be, well, villains. But as we'll soon see, some stories reject that trend, harkening back to a time when isekais were dangerous and strange, where characters appeared in other worlds with no one to help them. When I was a kid, my parents showed me The Wizard of Oz, and I loved it. For some time, it was one of my favorite movies. And rightly so, the movie was great. The production, the colors, the characters. Heck, I knew there was something off about the wizard, but I was young enough that I didn't know what that was until the characters found it out. And the witch, she was a force to be reckoned with. I remember being frightened of her. She was this force who lurked at the end of the plot, and you knew that they were going to confront her. And, well, I was a scaredy cat as a child, so when we got to the part with the big scary castle and the flying monkeys, like so many other kids, I said to my parents, I don't think we can finish this movie. And my dad, in a moment of brilliance, said, I can tell you something that's going to make it less scary, but it will spoil the ending. And I jumped at that chance. I said, yes, please, tell me. And that was when I found out that it was all a dream. Much like Dorothy, Katarina thinks that her life is a nightmare where death lurks behind every corner. But what Katarina doesn't realize is that her preparations are only one small part of what saves her from death and disownment. You see, there's this dramatic irony in Hamefura, where Katarina thinks she's in danger, and in fact, she's in very little danger at all. The original Katarina from the dating sim, the Katarina that our reincarnated protagonist inhabits, experienced misfortune because she treated everyone unkindly at every chance she got. But the world we see never knows that Katarina. Instead, they see a Katarina who loves Maria Campbell, the game's would-be protagonist, just as much as she loves Sweets, her brother, the Crown Prince, his brother, and his brother's fiancé, and the cute bookworm girl, and the cute bookworm girl's brother. And here's where we come to what Anime News Network calls Katarina's bisexual harem of doom, because that love is mutual. And while Katarina's love tends in a platonic direction, she may be the only character for whom that's true. Men and women alike love Katarina, the only Katarina they know, and the only Katarina they can imagine. Crown Prince Giordo would never stab her or exile her. Keith would never kill her with magic. And Maria would stand between her and any blade or spell that anyone tried to use against her. Yes, Katarina believes she's in danger, but she spends most of the plot completely safe. In fact, when she actually does get kidnapped in Season 2, she isn't even worried about it at all, because it doesn't look to her like a bad ending. And in fact, it's not. She wins over her captors with kindness and good listening skills. This is all because while Katarina might inhabit the body of a potential villainess, she herself is not a villainess. She's a good, kind, airheaded girl who loves sweets, gardening, and spending time with her friends. While the message in My Motto is Living Honestly and Humbly seems to have its protagonist actively recognize and reject the qualities of the villainess in herself, Katarina doesn't even have to try. As long as she can just be who she is, then the dangers she thinks she faces will continue to just be a bad dream. While the Oz of the Wizard of Oz movie might have just been a dream, the books were something else entirely. By the time I graduated middle school, I had read about 6 of L. Frank Baum's Oz novels, and they were zany. I think one of the most tense moments for me was when the wizard and Dorothy meet up by chance in Kansas, fall down a fissure in the earth, and are nearly executed by vegetable people. Of course, more close to home was the fact that in the novels there never was a dream. Dorothy really went to Oz. She clicked the silver slippers, not Ruby like in the movie, and instead of waking up in her bed, appeared very magically on the path in front of her house. Oz was real. Dorothy went back there repeatedly, had to learn its rules. If she messed up, there was no waking up safe and sound. Where Katarina's dangers are all bad dreams she can wake up from, other villainesses are more like Dorothy from the Oz books, unable to wake up from the dream. With the success of Hamefuru's light novel, villainous isekais started cropping up left and right, and with the success of the Hamefuru anime, those new stories started to wash up on American shores. You got I'm in Love with the Villainous, a story about a girl who gets reincarnated as the game's protagonist, but who helps the antagonistic rich girl avoid a bad ending because she loves the villainous more than any male love interest. You got cross-dressing villainous Cecilia Sylvie, a light novel in which the reincarnated villainous avoids her fate by pretending to be a man. And in 2017-2021, for us English speakers, we received I'm the Villainous, So I'm Taming the Final Boss by Sarasa Nagase. I'll be referring to this story as Taming the Final Boss for the rest of the video. Where Katarina's nightmares are all in her head, Eileen Dautricia's terrors in Taming the Final Boss are all too real. The end of her engagement with the prince isn't some far-off fear, it happens in the first minutes of the story. And it's in those minutes that the memories of her previous life come rushing back. Eileen refuses to bow.
You told me you still admired me. Obviously you still pine for me.
Eyes cold. Eileen spits out her words.
This is the problem with men.
What?
I said I did admire you. Past tense. At this point, I don't have the smallest scrap of interest in you.
It quickly becomes clear that the world is against Eileen. Noble society sides with the prince, and the heroine of the dating sim gets caught up in his lunacy. Perhaps more clearly than in any other villainous isekai, Eileen suffers not only for being a villainess, but for being a woman, and, in the eyes of that world, the worst kind of woman. A confident woman.
I'm the only one who would endure a woman like you. Bow your head.
What's interesting is that Katarina was never a villain, but Eileen never ceases to be one. Even with her memories from another world, she's always scheming, always hedging her bets, and always determined to come out on top. And this is why she seeks out the game's secret final boss, a prince in his own right, but the inheritor of power over demons, feared by society. This man, brother to Prince Cedric, is Prince Claude, and Eileen decides to romance him in the only way she knows how, by taming him.
What reason do you have to personally take on a project like this?
I intend to keep you as a pet, Master Claude. It is my role to provide you with a life of comfort.
If you won't answer honestly, then forget about it. This is a waste of time.
But a relationship does develop. Claude, with his subtle demonic sadism, is determined to make Eileen cry, and Eileen, in turn, is determined to make the demonic prince into a kept man, to use her words. Eileen succeeds in making enough money to fulfill her end of the bargain, succeeding against a world determined to shove them both into the corners of their own stories to die miserable deaths. But Eileen and Claude live. What makes Eileen's role as a villainess so special, and what makes her the best kind of Ojo-sama, is where she directs her energy. When Eileen uses cunning and stubbornness to get her way, she does so at the expense of those above her, not those below her. She punches up and not down, in comedy terms. When she creates a business to rebuild Claude's castle, she enlists the help of her poor and middle-class friends. At this point in the story, Eileen herself is in a desperate financial situation, so a lesser entrepreneur might profit at the expense of these people. But Eileen isn't just in it for the profit, as dire as her circumstances might be. She's still a noble, and a more arrogant one than most, but she can use that arrogance to tear down those above her and lift up those below her. Is she some kind of saint? No, she lies, doses a few demons with non-lethal poisons, punches a few people in the gut, but at the end of the day, she might be a mean girl TM, but she's not cruel. Her selfishness isn't just for herself. She drags some good people up with her, people society had forgotten, and that is the power of an Ojo-sama fully realized. Meanwhile, Cedric, the prince who tossed Eileen aside, disconnects completely from reality. In a world so stacked against women, there's a way to regain control over the fiancé he abandoned, and this is why I have to give an attempted sexual assault trigger warning for this book. While he isn't successful, Cedric attempts to do something to Eileen that shouldn't be surprising given the world we've seen up to this point, but it still is, and painfully so. He's stopped before he has a chance to do anything, but if that's not your cup of tea, I completely understand if you want to skip this one. At the end of the first novel, Eileen gains a power that could even obliterate the Demon Prince, her fiancé, if she so chose. And instead, she uses it to protect him. By telling us what happened in the original visual novel, Taming the Final Boss shows us how even a truly powerful woman like the dating sim's original Eileen, without her memories from a past life, could be destroyed by a system of men who believe that they are good and righteous, all the while ostracizing and destroying anyone who isn't like them. That is, demons like Prince Claude and ambitious women like Eileen. But this story also gives us a chance to see such a woman win and help others to do so in the process. It gives us a villainess and says that maybe she was right all along, that even if she wasn't kind, she might have been more good than her world gave her credit for. And it leaves us with an interesting question. Are some of these so-called villainesses, or Ojosumas in general, maybe better people than we give them credit for? Before I started working on this video, I had some assumptions about the role that Ojosumas played in media. Specifically, I thought that they were used as nuisances at best and outright villainesses at worst. And what I found was something actually much more interesting. Apparently, otome games don't have villainesses anymore? You see, TV Tropes calls it a dead unicorn trope. It's a trope that's so overplayed that it's only ever used in parodies of itself now. And that means that just like JRPGs are no longer about four guys going off to slay a demon lord after killing some slimes, visual novels for women don't pit you against a Marie Antoinette lookalike anymore. Maybe, just maybe, the moment that we realized the Ojosuma deserved better was the moment that she stopped being a villainess. First, it's given us all room to speak up about how cool it is for an isekai anime to be about women fighting a system that oppresses them, and winning, instead of being about some normal dude getting cool powers and hanging out with all the cool monster girls. And secondly, we started seeing more villainesses, quote-unquote, who were better, who had faults, yes, but who were still human beings with depth and drive and yes, even some goodness. And we realized that even before Hamefura, there had been some truly good Ojosumas and even good villainesses who had been with us all along. And you know what? Taming the Final Boss is getting an anime this October, and I, for one, can hardly wait. So before I conclude here, I'd like to make clear who this video is not about. This video is not about people who profit off of human misery in our world. I am not redeeming that. This video is also not about those who make public policy that hurts people. It's not about abusers, and it's not intended to redeem Cruella de Vil for trying to murder puppies. So this video and this next segment are not about them. With all that being said, this might be a long shot, but maybe we can learn something from these villainous isekai. Maybe we can look past the tropes we use to judge people we interact with and see human beings, not rude labels we find in media or on the internet. Maybe watching these shows can make us all a little better so we can see the humanity in someone that we'd otherwise see as just an adversary, the villain in our story. They aren't. At the end of the day, people are just people. For years, we thought the villainess was a stock character who existed to make the protagonist's life miserable. Well, maybe the moral is that there is no such thing as a villainess. And there never was. And ironically, when we do get Ojosumas as protagonists now, they live in media that says that the villainous label should never have been the start and the end of their stories. The goal of most villainous stories these days is just to make sure that they live their best lives, and that they get a happy ending. And that, in itself, is a happy ending, I think.